Well, it's been 43 emotional days of harrowing testimony, tears and apologies. There were also denials and a lot of blame shifting. Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi was the last witness to testify at the Life Esidimeni Arbitration hearings last night. He's described the deaths of 144 mentally ill patients in the tragedy as one of the most painful events in post-apartheid South Africa. Motsoaledi was overcome by emotion as he apologized to the affected families at the end of his testimony yesterday. And then Gauteng Premier David Makhura, as well as Health MEC Gwen and Ramokgopa, also apologized and committed to fixing the health system during their testimonies. Rights group Section 27 has also suggested that 12 more mentally ill patients have died over and above the confirmed death toll of 144. Proceedings at the hearings have been adjourned until the 8th, when lawyers involved in the arbitration will debate compensation for the families of the victims. To talk a little bit more about this, I'm joined in studio by our reporter Chriselda Lewis, who's been covering the hearings. Chriselda, you've been sitting through those weeks of extremely telling evidence and telling testimony, just pointing to such an extreme disregard for human life and complete and utter incompetence, not to mention what the families called disregard by the officials that were implicated in this.
Absolutely shocking, Natasha, and I don't think we've yet grasped the gravity or the extent of this tragedy that took place. We got to learn about how the patients themselves were treated, how they stayed, what it is that they were denied, the basic rights to proper health care, which is enshrined in the Constitution. All of that was basically taken and thrown out the window. And how, when we went into these hearings, there was an element of blame shifting and no one wanting to take accountability or responsibility for what rightly the health minister describes as one of the most devastating incidents in the healthcare sector to happen post-apartheid. That's no better way to describe that. And the blame shifting, no one wanting to take responsibility, and the notion of everyone saying it was a collective decision to make in order to have the most vulnerable in society put at the back of vans, some of them strapped with sheets, and basically taken to NGOs, unlicensed NGOs, and have no food, not be given any medication, and given no water to drink. Absolutely harrowing. And I think, Natasha, one of the most heartfelt things I think the families have now said is that only towards the end, right when we saw, because remember, one of the key reasons that the three senior officials, the Katani Mahlangu, as well as Dr. Bonnie Selabano and Makhabo Manamela, they had said all of this was due to cost-cutting measures, only to have the finance MEC in the province say, hold on, that's absolutely not the case. In fact, there was more than enough money to cater for the mentally ill patients at Life Esidimeni, and they simply don't know why all this was carried out. But certainly you could tell that there is some, as the families would say, perhaps some underhanded activities which perhaps would come to light at a later stage, but very, very devastating for the families who now have to deal with all of this grief. And as you pointed out in your intro as well, now we're told there might be even more. So that's why I say I don't think we've even begun to digest the gravity of what has taken place, because every time when you think you're coming towards the end of it all, Section 27 now says that perhaps there are names that did not appear on the initial list of 144. And remember, that number had actually escalated just a couple of days ago. Not to mention the fact that there's a missing persons case that's been opened. So we don't know about those people, whether they've survived or haven't. And I mean, there were times that I would listen to this and think, I just cannot listen anymore. So for the families, I can't imagine what it must have been like for them. What are they expecting now? As I mentioned in the intro, there's that debate on compensation, but and they've got all the apologies, they've got some kind of they've heard some of the testimony, but really, what do they get from this marathon hearing that we've had? There's now a deep sense of perhaps we do know now that the reasons that were given to the arbitration hearings were absolutely not true. Now, what these families are saying is that you can apologize all you want. Yes, the apologies have been there. But what needs to happen now is that those who are clearly should take responsibility for what happened in the Life Esidimeni tragedy should face criminal charges. That's what the families say will bring the final bit of closure for them. Because
will that happen? Will we see that?
It certainly seems to be the case, because you must remember, Natasha, the last update that we got from the state was that once the arbitration hearings themselves are concluded, part of that evidence will be given to the National Prosecuting Authority, and then perhaps very soon we will see cases or charges being formulated against those who are responsible. Remember Gauteng Mahlangu, who was the head of the department at the time as MEC. You had the accounting officer, Dr. Barney Selabano, and very central to that as well, who was the former mental health director, Dr. Makhura. Those three, the families say, should face the stiffest penalties. And who's got to make sure that happens? The police need to ensure that they do their work. The testimonies are now there, which will be used, and ultimately they say all of this would have been in vain if nobody at the end of the day is jailed because of so many deaths.
And it highlights major flaws, a major transformation that needs to happen within this sector. And I mean, you mentioned Barbara Creasy's testimony. She said there was no pressure to cut on a core service, and a health service is a core service.
That's right.
And that the department had actually underspent millions of rands every year since 2015, but they still had no money to pay Esidimeni. So how could they possibly say that that Esidimeni contract needed to be cut? So how that got through the cracks, how this wasn't picked up. So it just highlights some major flaws within the way things are done.
And I think that comes exactly on the shoulders of Barbara Creasy's apology, because you must also recall this all happened under her watch as well, together with the Gauteng Premier David Makhura, who was also apologized. So it shows that there are massive cracks within a wide system that really need to be tightened up to ensure that this travesty does not happen again. And we saw that commitment coming from David Makhura, apologizing and saying he hopes and he will try to fix this, to quote him. He wants to fix this and ensure that it doesn't happen again. But it really exposes another thing, I think, is the media as well. I don't want to leave that out, Natasha. In a particular sector where you had mental health that was so underreported, and we went into these hearings to understand how some of the most vulnerable in society are almost taken and thrown into facilities and do not get the required care that they're supposed to get. And equally so, officials were trained to do this kind of work, did not follow proper procedure, and simply took these families and basically cast them out, not looking at the consequences, and absolutely at the end of the day, no one wanted to take accountability. Hence, David Makhura now says that there are also senior officials. A disciplinary process will start for other senior officials, because clearly there are more heads that need to roll in this tragedy. It's not just the three people who took that decision. Yes, they were at the top of this hierarchy, but there are many more others who need to feel massive repercussions for what has happened in the Life Esidimeni tragedy.
Not to mention all those working in the NGOs that just did not look after the patients.
Well, absolutely. You heard harrowing testimonies about how monies were being withdrawn from the SASSA cards even after the patients had died. So there's a whole lot more that really leaves you shocked, and while you say you would gasp every time you would listen, absolutely difficult for us as well to absorb all of that. It's in the nature of our job to do so. When the police run in, we run in with them as well. But it does have that kind of effect for you to understand the heartache and pain of so many people, of a tragedy that I'm not sure if it would be twice or even thrice more than some of the most riveting or some of the most atrocious actions that have happened post-democracy. To see something that has happened, such as the Life Esidimeni tragedy, where you've got the numbers that keep on rising, and I can confidently say, where I'm sitting here at the moment, we're not sure about the numbers. There could be much more than the 150 and slightly over that Section 27 is now referring to.
It is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. Chriselda, thank you very much for that. Our Chriselda Lewis, who was in those hearings every single day for the past 43 days or however long it was, just giving us a wrap of where things go to now.